What if I told you that there are some simple, very simple words that you may or may not be saying to your teenager, and that would end up having significant impact on the kind of adult they turn out to become? I mean, simple 5 word statements that maybe you're saying it, but maybe not saying it enough, but that would end up having significant impact on the kind of adults they become, on the kind of relationships they're able to keep, on the kind of jobs they're able to do, on the kind of perception that they present about themselves as they step into the outer real world. And this is very important because sometimes the words we do not say to our children end up becoming that voice that keeps playing in their head for the rest of their lives. And I'm sure some parents listening to me would say, I do my bit, I pay the bills. I make sure they go to some of the best schools in the country or in the world, pay millions, thousands, hundreds of thousands to ensure they get the best education. You might be enrolling them in some extracurricular activities like football, acting, writing, and you expect them to see those sacrifices, those hours you put into work, those times you end up spending weeks and days working just so you can put food on the table and ensure that they wear designer clothes and that they get the best life. You expect them to see that and understand that daddy really cares, that mommy really loves me. But though those children are well clothed, well fed, well taken care of, they might be hungry for something, hungry for simple positive affirmations, hungry for recognition, hungry for reassurance, hungry for one simple 5 word statement. I am proud of you. Simple, isn't it? Now, telling your young person that simple statement, I am proud of you. Psychologists have found that it goes a long way in shaping how that young person would end up perceiving themselves, understanding themselves, and relating with their world. So that's what we're going to be talking about in this video. I'm going to be walking you through exactly my 5-step model that I often use, and I find it's very effective in helping your young person understand. So it's not just saying, I am proud of you. There's how to say it so it makes the impact that it ought to make. So hang around till the end. But before we proceed, as usual, I'm going to ask you to please subscribe and follow us, because every week, this is what we do. We give you well-researched, practical, evidence-based tools that would make your parenting experience not just fun, but effective. And effective not just to you, but also to your young person. So hit that button. Also, if you do that, it will help the video to get to other people. It will encourage you and encourage us to keep these things coming. So like, share, comment also to help the algorithm get it there. Now, before I proceed, let me quickly tell you a story, right? So I was listening to this radio phone-in program, and this lady rang in. As at the time she rang in, I think she was about 50 something years already. And she was recounting her experience with her dad, who, according to her, was a very, very lovely man who did everything a dad should do for their children. But she grew up always expecting and wanting to hear her dad tell her how proud he was of her. Unfortunately for her, her dad died before she got to that point where she could hear that. But that has followed her all through her life. And some specific things she was referring to was she would come home from school, maybe get a very good grade, not the top, 1 or 2, but maybe somewhere up there. And the dad would always look at it and be like, you can do better. You can go higher. She would do her chores at home, wash the dishes and all of that. The dad would come, would look around, take notice of what she has done, but would always point at the little mess she has left here and there. And those things were always ringing at the back of her head. And she kept putting more effort into what she does, hoping that someday she was going to hear her dad tell her how proud he was of her. But he was just not that kind of person. And I could really relate with that story because that's the kind of dad I had too. My dad wouldn't bother. I can't remember ever hearing him telling me that he was proud of me. My dad, I can't even remember him ever saying I love you or things like. He's not someone who had time for things like that. And every time I talk about my dad, I point at a lot of wrong things that he has done. But may I quickly say that I got to understand later that if he knew better, he would have done better. So I don't hold anything against him. And then I didn't know enough to understand the impact that has had on the adult that I have become, because later in life, some of the impacts I'm going to be pointing out in this video, I had to deal consciously with a lot of them. So this 5-word statement is very, very important. Let's quickly talk about 5 traits that might show up in an adult's life if they do not hear this simple word of affirmation well enough. Number 1 is low self-esteem and self-doubt. Now, I was listening to the Deputy Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, David Lammy, speaking recently, and he said he had to deal with imposter syndrome very late on in his life. This is someone who has achieved so much in his life. And I relate strongly with that because that's something I had to deal with in my life, where you achieve so much, you do a lot of things, but you still feel that maybe I was just lucky, or I hope they don't discover someday that I'm a fraud. There's that voice in your head that keeps telling you that you're just simply not good enough. You may have achieved this by luck. You may have done this simply because others were not watching, or because the right person did not apply for the job. And I speak as someone who graduated with the first class. And even with the first class, I thought, maybe I was just lucky or something like that. Went on, got a master's, PhD, and just keep going and achieving great things in life, passing interviews, getting very good jobs. But there's always that voice in your head telling you, you may have just gotten lucky this one time, but very soon you will be found out. Now that's low self-esteem speaking. A lot of people still struggle with this. And it's a bit like a spectrum, right? There's that healthy one that, tells you that you need to do more to get better. But there's the unhealthy extreme that stops you, that slows you down, that prevents you from achieving your full potential. Now, that's the part we're trying to deal with. And this stems mostly from a young person who didn't hear enough that their parents, their most respected adults. Now, you need to understand your position in the life of your young person. You are like the number 1 role model in their lives. Anyone else can tell them they are proud of them. But if it doesn't come from this individual who means the whole world to them, it might not really land well. Note that children do not consciously or automatically know how to measure their self-worth. Sometimes they borrow their first sense of self and worth from the adults around them. Don't get me wrong, correction is right. Parental correction, setting standards, pushing them to achieve more is all right. But if the only voice they hear from you is the voice of criticism, they would end up becoming adults who would never believe enough in themselves. So let me end this point with a simple question. When last, as a dad or as a mom, did you look at your young person in the eye for something specific they've done and tell them, I'm proud of you for this and that you've done? I'm proud of you. This time, not for this and that you've done, but for the effort you've put into that thing. Although we didn't get the result we wanted, but for putting that effort into it, I'm proud of you. When last did you do that? Trait number 2, lack of identity. Now, have you ever met some of these adults who struggle to answer very simple questions about them? I'm not talking about politicians now, because most politicians do not answer questions. I think it's part of the trainings of being a politician. Never answer questions. And sometimes you wouldn't blame them because some journalists specialize in gotcha. They're just looking for opportunity to clip something and say, he or she said that. Anyways, that's I digress. So, have you ever met adults who struggle to answer questions like, what do you believe in? What exactly do you stand for? Now, I'm not saying this is the only reason, but oftentimes children who were not validated enough, encouraged enough, noticed enough, end up doubting what they actually stand for. They may not actually feel safe enough to explore who they really are. And so there's that monkey always in their heads telling them, that's not you. Because the last time they tried to be them, all they met was criticism. The last time they were themselves, hoping they would get some words of affirmation, all they got was silence or was still criticism. That, therefore, has not encouraged them to develop a self-identity, a self that they are always proud of, that is at the tip of their fingers and that they can always reach to and say, this is who I am. And if you've ever worked with people like that, again, I'm not talking about politicians, you would understand that they are quite difficult to work with. And not just your experience working with them, it actually slows them down because life is a bit like you focusing on a specific thing and just hitting that point until you get the best results. The most successful people in life are people who found themselves early enough, stayed at who they are, and kept hitting that specific point for long enough that whatever barriers were in their ways gave way for their success. Trait number 3, people pleasing. Now, people pleasing is that situation where someone is so unsure of themselves or so desperate for approval that they say yes to anything that comes their way, even when it's detrimental to their progress or to their lives. And you see them, they always end up in wrong relationships, wrong jobs, overloading themselves with promises that they are unable to keep. Now, that's no way to live life. But again, that sometimes can be traced back to a young person who never got the approval, the confirmation, the affirmative words from the most respected people in their lives. They struggle with boundaries, they apologize too much, avoid conflicts, they feel responsible for everyone's emotions, and they are afraid to be disliked. They may even allow people to maltreat or mistreat them because deep down, they are still trying to earn love. They are still looking for the love of the most respected people in their lives. For a child or for a teenager who rarely received validation, pleasing other people might become their survival strategy. So now that we've looked at all the traits, I'll give you 5 steps, 5 ways. So it's my model that I use, and hopefully you'll find this very, very useful. So the first thing is, those words of affirmation, that feedback that you give to your young person has to be specific. It has to be tied to something specific, not just, vague things like, well done. What does that even mean? Well done. Say exactly what you are proud of. For example, I am very proud of how you stayed calm during that difficult conversation. Number 2, effort. Praise efforts, not just results. A young person has put time and effort into preparing for an exams. They got 49, maybe not a pass. Now, that's disappointing, but you can appreciate them for putting the time in to prepare in the first place. Number 3, pure praise. The mistake a lot of parents make is, you've done very well, but that. You've really written that work in an excellent quality, but try your best at all times to separate the praise from the criticism. You can always come back to the criticism later, but they mustn't always go together, because sometimes if you end with the criticism, the memory of the praise would have been completely lost to that end criticism. Next, affirm character. Now, you don't just wait for results and achievements. The character they are building is something you should always affirm. It's something you should recognize. For example, I am proud of the honesty you displayed in that conversation. I'm proud of the courage you're showing. I'm proud of how you went on to apologize after that situation. For example, just this morning, I took my son for football. He plays football. And I noticed something that really warmed my heart. His friend at some point, I think, fell down or something, and he walked up to him, stayed there with him, patted his back for a long time, and walked him up back into the game. That was a good thing. That's something to recognize, not just the results or the goals he would have scored. Now, the last point is very important, and I call it to repair, because it's possible that a lot of you listening to me today have gotten it wrong over the years. Now, there's nothing wrong with you walking up to your young people or your young person today and saying, I have gotten it wrong all this while. I know I've focused so much or too much on criticism. I have realized now that I need to recognize this and that you've also done. Now, that in itself is loaded, because you're not just teaching them how to accept when they do something wrong. You are also helping them understand that you've not had it right all this while, but you're putting effort in to start doing it right going forward. That's a strong one there. So if you follow the steps of what I've said so far, it's actually a model that I've given you, SEPA. So specific, effort, pure praise, affirmation, and repair. So that 5-step would ensure that you give your young people consistently what they need to become well-rounded adults. Obviously, there are other things that you need to give to them, but as far as this conversation is concerned, SEPA is what you need. So here's my simple challenge to you as a parent. Before the close of day today, before the sun sets today, please look out for one thing that you can walk up to your young person later in the evening and say, hi, so and so person, I have observed that you have done this, that, and that. And to be honest, I am very proud of that. Or I have observed that you've tried to do this, that, and that. And although you did not get the result you wanted, but that effort alone, I truly appreciate and I'm proud of you. Do that. And in the comment section, I'd like you to let me know how that went. And if you were unable to do that, I would also like to know why you couldn't do that. And if you're struggling to do that, let me know and I might be able to guide you. Again, do not forget to like, to follow, to share, to subscribe, and stay tuned, because every week, our promise to you is to keep these things coming. And all we ask of you is to help it get to other people by hitting those buttons. Thank you for now, and I'll see you again soon.